In the summer of 2013, Minnesota resident Gary Herbst seemingly disappeared. Years later, investigators made a startling discovery. 48 Hours correspondent Peter Van Zandt has that story.
In December of 2017, the Barron County Sheriff's Office in rural Wisconsin received an unusual 911 call, says Detective Jeff Nelson.
From a homeowner reporting that their family dog brought back a human skull.
Authorities soon determined the victim had died from a gunshot wound to the back of the head.
We were reviewing missing persons cases, but nothing was definitive to who this victim was.
3 years later, finally, a match from the remains to 57-year-old Gary Albert Herbst. Investigators headed to his last known address. Gary's wife and son had moved out after his disappearance. But former neighbors Chad and Kaya Krammel say Gary was combative.
He was just an evil person.
Did you feel he was a dangerous man?
Absolutely.
And they remembered noticing something strange happening late one night around the time he went missing.
I see the neighbors scrubbing the floors. I see them scrubbing the walls.
They eventually brought out a rolled up carpet, and Chad looked at me and he said, "Kaya, I think they finally killed him."
Joining us now from New York is 48 Hours correspondent Peter Van Zandt. Peter, when authorities tried to figure out exactly who killed Gary, I'm guessing obviously they eventually spoke to the wife and son. What did they tell the authorities?
Well, that's when the intrigue really began in this case, because Connie, the wife, and Austin, the son, told authorities that after a big argument some years earlier, Gary, the husband and father, packed up a suitcase, took $5,000 in cash of the family's money, took his wife Connie's wedding ring, went out the front door and got into a vehicle driven by a stranger, a man that they did not recognize. They drove off and they claimed they never heard from Gary again. And investigators thought this was all pretty fishy, particularly since they did not file a missing persons report for 9 months, and that was only after one of Gary's siblings contacted them and said, "What do you mean he's gone? File a missing person report." And that's when things started really taking off in this case.
Now, the night the neighbors saw walls being scrubbed in the house and the rug being taken out, did they really think Gary had been murdered? And why didn't they just call the police by that point?
Well, they talk about that in my interview, and one jokingly, sort of jokingly, said to her husband, the husband said, I think they finally killed him. It was a night of the rain. It was coming down. There was a thunderstorm. It was after midnight, and they watched a car go to the back of the house. Gary loved his lawn and would never allow it to be disturbed like that. And watching all of that loaded up, it was very suspicious to them, but they didn't feel like they had enough to call the police. Later, when they learned that Austin had been accused of murdering his father and that his mother had been arrested too, the neighbors actually rallied around them and asked and hoped that they would not be prosecuted for this crime, because they thought Gary basically had it coming.
A must-see episode, like you mentioned, Peter. Thank you so much, and you can watch 48 Hours tomorrow night at 9 right here on CBS 19.